our weekly town hall, Smart Justice, during COVID-19. We have a special guest tonight joining us, Michael Lareau, a good friend of mine. Many of you had the opportunity to see my post last week of him being released from Oak Hill Correctional Institution after serving 22 years in prison. So we're joined by him tonight. He's going to have a discussion with us about, his experience. He's going to, talk about the things he saw within the Department of Corrections, some of his thoughts and ideals as it relates to reforming our criminal justice system. As you all know, the Smart Justice Campaign is all about centering the leadership and voices of directly impacted people, because we believe that those who are closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And our good friend Michael Lareau is someone who has left the problem, and he's here with us, and he is going to talk to us about some solutions. So with that, I'm going to ask Michael to introduce himself and also to tell the people a little bit about himself. Michael?
Hello, I'm Michael Lareau. I entered the prison system at the age of 15 years old with a 40-year sentence. It came on the heels of running away from home and making poor decisions. While I was incarcerated, I took all my programming. I went on to college after doing my HSED and vocational education. After that, I went to 14 different parole hearings, was denied, which we can talk about if you guys want to. But that's about it for now.
Thank you, Michael. And so, given that you had mentioned in your story that you had went to 14 different parole hearings during the course of your incarceration, and I'm assuming that all 14 of them were denied because you were just recently released last week. Can you talk a little bit about why you were denied 14 times, and talk about what happened this time that made you that allowed you to be released and return to your community and your family?
In the 14 years, I think I was seeing, or 12 years, I was seeing parole 14 different times. The only time that there was two different commissioners, Leonard Wells and the current commissioner, John Tate, who were the only two people that were willing to give people second chances. Even on my 14th hearing, I seen Doug Drankevich, and he continued my incarceration, but the chairman himself reviewed the file and seen that it was not a just decision, and he overturned that and allowed me a second chance at life. Had it not been for him and his ability to be humane and see that people are fallible and that there's redemption and there's room for improvement always, but that people should get a second chance, I would not be here speaking today. And a lot of the times when they would deny parole, they would always say that I had not served sufficient time for the severity of the crime. Although the law that I was sentenced under, it was 1/4 of my sentence, made me eligible for release. So that was kind of an arbitrary excuse to continue my incarceration, even though I was doing well. I was, like I said, I completed my programming. I went on to do college courses. I maintained good behavior for many, many years. They still use those very arbitrary reasons, them umbrella statements for why they should continue incarceration. So that was like the main reason, is not sufficient amount of time for the severity of the crime, and that it would pose an undue risk to the public, even though that the DOC itself was reducing me in custody and sending me down to minimums and minimum communities, so I was safe enough within the community, within the prison, but not within the community, in their eyes, in the parole's eyes at the time.
And so, so prior to this whole COVID-19, the ACLU's campaign for smart justice has been focusing on a few things that will reduce our jail and prison population. And our primary goal is to end the practice of crimeless revocation or technical rules revocations, which is sending up to 3,000 people back to prison each year. In addition to that, we were also asking for an expansion of the earned release program, which is a drug and alcohol treatment program. But we're in coalition with organizations like Expo and Wisdom, who has been calling for parole reform. And they were calling for individuals such as yourself to be released for the very reason that you just stated, that when you go in front of the parole commission, you were told insufficient amount of time, depreciate the seriousness of the crime. What is it that you want the public to know? What is it that you want even parole commissioners who may be watching this this town hall tonight? What is it that you want them to know? What is it you think they should know? And also, you know, you're speaking on behalf of individuals who are currently who are currently incarcerated at this moment, and who are hoping to get the opportunity that you have just got a little bit over a week ago to rejoin your family and your community. So what would you say to the viewers and also to the officials who are operating and making decisions on behalf of individuals such as yourself?
I know that, especially with parole law people, there's a lot of people that committed offenses when they were young people, not fully developed, not fully formed in their personalities or understanding what their goals were in life. But they've served more than 20 years. Everybody that's under parole law or old law has served over 20 years in prison. These people are all, most of these people are all dying for a chance at a second chance, at having being there with their families, at starting a career and just living a normal life. And I think under the Walker administration, he made a big statement about how it's the worst of the worst that are still incarcerated. And I think that has maintained in the parole commission for a long time under certain commissioners. It's been up until recently with Mr. John Tate that people have started to get a chance at life. But I think that the guys who have been in 20, 30, even 40 years, once they are released, they do very well. Everybody that I know, everybody I'm sure you know that has served that amount of time has gotten out and has started businesses, has participated in organizations, have been productive in their communities. These people are dying for a chance to live a little life, just a normal life. And they went in having made horrible decisions and having affected other people's lives, but they can be an asset. They've reached points that, in their development where they just want to be an asset. They're so tired of sitting around waiting for tomorrow, waiting for the chance, that once they're given the opportunity, they seize it.
So what would you say to an elected official? What would you say to the governor? And what would you say to Chairman John Tate to improve the process of reviewing individuals' cases who have served over 20 years, as you have just stated? Most of these folks have been in prison over 20 years. Many of them have been incarcerated since they were teenagers. And we know that the science and the data says that these are individuals who have not developed, their brain has not developed. So as a result of that, their judgment, they shouldn't be held responsible for the decisions that they made because they were children. And you yourself, you were 15 years old, when you went in. And I'm glad that, the chairman decided that you have served sufficient amount of time and returned you to your friends, your family, and your community. But how do we fix this problem? And how do we get more of these men and women home with their families and their communities? So what would you say to these elected officials? What would you say to the governor as to how we fix this problem?
I believe that in my situation, I was kind of fortunate that the chairman had reviewed my file due to other people's advocating on my behalf prior to my parole hearing in May. And he had ordered a pre-release investigation be done prior to the hearing. that expedited my release because my parole plan was already approved. Everything was pretty much ironed out as far as my release and my transition and for me to be successful. So for the people who are having approaching hearings, especially people that are in minimum or community minimum, I believe that it would be helpful, and it would probably streamline the process, especially with the DOC and the social workers and the paperwork end on that side, to have pre-release investigations done prior to the hearings, at least a month out. That would give everybody that's involved, social workers in the DOC, parole and parole agents, the parole chairman, and for the as far as writing a grant or something, everybody would have a nice cushion leading up to the hearing. You could then identify the people who have places to go and who needs help. And if someone does need help, just because they need help doesn't mean they shouldn't get released. It's just that we should find help for them people, get them involved and in contact with the people who can help them with reintegration, with housing and bus fare. And, one of my biggest things is, had I not had the support network that I have right now, just learning technology was a big thing. It's a big challenge to learn even just how to set the Zoom call up. And so, like, for those people, they need help. Like when I got out, just setting up the Badger Care and Food Share and setting a bank account up. Those things, if people don't have the support, they should still be released, and we should have them hooked up with people who can help them.
Thank you. And so we're receiving questions from Facebook, and I encourage our viewers to continue to ask Mike questions, and we will definitely try to get to all of your questions. We have a question off of Facebook that asks, did the pandemic affect what you received from work release?
As far as release?
I believe that's what.
I think that they were trying to identify ways to reduce the prison population in general. I think that was Tony Evers' plan from when he campaigned. I think the pandemic definitely sped that process up when they were trying to identify people, especially at Oak Hill where I was. It was operating at 130% capacity. So if it is to get into that place or any place in the state of Wisconsin, because of all the overcrowding, it is going to spread like wildfire. There's nothing that they can do. I know that the DOC says that they've put things in place to protect the public and protect the inmates, but that is not the case. I was just there not a week ago, and I'm on a housing unit with 47 people, and there's no way to social distance. We use shared bathrooms, shared dining. The hallways are less than 6 feet wide. You're always going to be around people. So it may or may not have helped me get out sooner, but I can't say for sure.
And would you say, Michael, that given that we are a state that is overcrowded and we have a significant amount of people currently on work release, going to work every day, working in the community, leaving the prison house and going and work on firms or institutional jobs that is outside the fence. Are these individuals who are able to be released back into the general public? Could you talk about why keeping them in prison makes sense if they are able to go out and work every day for 8 hours or 16 hours and then return to the prison and pay the prison $750 for rent? Could you talk about whether or not it would be a good ideal in reducing the prison population by releasing these individuals?
Absolutely. I think that it doesn't make sense to continue to house them. I think that there was an article done at some point where they said it was going to save almost $2.2 million or something like that to release the people that are in community custody. It doesn't make sense if they can go out into the public and work and maintain employment in the world and then come back to prison. It doesn't make sense for them to remain in prison during a pandemic and put their lives at risk. It doesn't make sense. So if they were to release them, I don't know how many community minimums there are, but there's quite a few, at least 10, if not more. Um, each place holding 140, 150 people. That's a step. And and to me, it wouldn't be such a scary step for the public. Sometimes it's a perception thing to the public, and you already have these people in your community working. So to release them makes sense.
Thank you. And so we have another question from Facebook, again about parole eligible individuals. The question reads, do you think parole eligible people housed in max and medium settings receive the same consideration as those in minimum?
As far as release,
I believe as far as release, as far as whether or not they receive a low defer, yeah, I think that's what he's asking.
no, I don't believe that they get the same consideration. I think that if they're in mediums and maxes, I think that it's still the status quo. I don't think that many people are getting released straight from medium or minimal or max. So no, I don't think that they're getting the same consideration. I know they get a packet every time you go up to parole. You get a packet of parole considerations, and it's all bullet points of these generalized considerations from parole on when and what they consider to release you. And I guarantee they're not being held to the same standard, even if they've completed their programming and they've stayed out of trouble. And a lot of it comes down to sentence structure instead of what's relevant. What's relevant is how you've conducted yourself, whether you've done the things asked of you as far as education and programming. And if you've done those things and you have a place to go, you should still be considered for release.
And so our next question, this looks like a Carl Fields question, expo organizer for the Racine Kenosha area. He asks, what affected you the most from prison that you would like to see changed, and what are you willing to do to see that change through? So I'm assuming what affected you most negatively, I'm assuming, from prison that you would like to see change, and what are you willing to do to see that through or see that change through?
I think one of the biggest things is just the social aspect. It's like you're living in a world of polar opposites. In prison, everything that's cool is what's negative out here. And I think that growing up in a prison, sending people to prison at 14, 15 years old is ridiculous because you're growing your formative years in an environment that it's crazy. So I think long term, that's what's affected me the most. Um, it hasn't stopped me from forming relationships and from being a part of my family, but it's been a very difficult road.
Okay. I have another question from a Shay Sortwell. He asks, um, how long were you in minimum with the permission to work outside the fence?
So I was at minimum for 3, 4, 5, about 7 years.
Okay. Okay. That's a long time to be at minimum. I mean, I don't know what they need to see.
I don't know
That's a
either.
long time to be at
I,
minimum. I mean, because I mean, as an impacted person myself, when you go through the security levels, max, medium, minimum, I mean, the next step after 2 years, I would say, is freedom, the free world, because 6 months to a year of being a minimum, you're working outside the fence at a job site. So I don't know. Wow, that's a long time, but it speaks to you being denied parole 14 times, which speaks to the problems that exist within our parole system. And that's what we need. We need forward thinking parole commissioners and the forward thinking parole chair. And Chairman Tate sounds as though he's a forward thinking guy because of the releases he has done over the last couple of months and some of his ideals as it relates to the parole commission and how it should move forward. So I hope that the parole commission continues to evolve and continue to do the right thing and release folks back to their families and their communities so that we can reduce our prison population, so that we can not continue to be a public health crisis as a correctional setting. Another question that I'm getting, how many folks meet the requirements of parole and are not released?
I would say most. Most have completed their programs. There's very few, small number of people who are in maxes, who are continuously making poor decisions and getting into fights and being disruptive. Very few people are doing that under the old law. Most people are just in there doing time. That's all they're doing. They're just sitting there waiting for tomorrow so that they can try to get to their next parole hearing and see what the deferment is. What I've seen that was stunning to me is that people go into parole asking for deferments rather than releases. And then because they've gotten so used to the idea that it's just going to be another deferment, and they just need a small enough one so that the PRC panel or the DOC will allow them to go out to the farm or go out to work so they can be there for 2-3 years. And so I would say most.
Okay. And so another question we have, and again, the public is not aware of the nuances of how the parole commission works, how the program review committee, which is the committee, what you just mentioned, where guys go and sit in front of this group of correctional staff, and they determine whether or not you stay in maximum security, or whether or not you go to medium security. How long? When if the question that I'm looking at is, if all people at minimum are all people at minimum allowed to work outside if they find a job? What is that process? How does that look?
Well, they certainly at Oak Hill. There's almost nearly, I think, 750 people, and I think there's like 40 people working. So absolutely not. And they have very specific contracts and very specific process. And it's such a bottleneck at Oak Hill to get a job in the community. So they have a three-tiered system where you start pushing lawnmowers and doing odds and ends around the prison. Then you can go out to the farm for X amount of months. And then if you're lucky, you can get out to a work release job, which is a contract that the prison has set up with one of a few factory jobs or whatever. But no, not everyone's going to have that opportunity. I think that's one of the biggest frustrations, is because you get this catch-22 where, if PRC is not willing to give you the custody, then parole's not willing to let you out because you're not in the custody and not work release. And it's the same thing with the program. We got stuff for years. Parole saying they're not going to allow us out until we finish our program, but the DOC wouldn't let us take our program because we weren't close enough to our mandatory release date. So it becomes very frustrating for many people being stuck.
Okay. Will I be correct if I say that when folks come to when they are granted minimum community custody, will I be correct in saying that the waiting list to go out and work outside a job outside of the institutional setting is pretty long, pretty extensive, and there's a process that you have to go through in order for you to be considered to work out in the community, such as working an institution job for 90 or 180 days. Would I be correct in making that statement?
Absolutely. I think the quickest thing to get to work is if you get to one of the Wisconsin Correctional Center System camps. And even then, you're waiting, like you said, 90 days, if not more, depending on what center you end up in.
Mm-hmm.
So absolutely, you're waiting quite a while.
Okay. And so we're going to pivot here, and I know that I had the opportunity to meet your dad when I came up to Oak Hill when you were being released. Great guy. And I saw the expression on his face. I saw the sigh of relief lifted off of his shoulder to have his son back with him after seeing you taken away from him at the age of 15. And so what a lot of folks do not know, or there's not a lot of discussion being had around the human impact, the impact that this has on your family, the impact that this have on your significant others, your significant other, your wife, etc. So I don't know if your dad is around or if your significant other is around, but I would like to get one of those folks in and just have a conversation with them about how this has impacted them emotionally. How has it affected you emotionally being denied parole for 14 times, having to deal with PRC and parole denials. So it's a two-part question that I would like for you to answer, and I would also like if your dad is there or if Caitlin is there, if they can speak to that roller coaster, that emotional roller coaster, that would be great. And also, I would like for them to talk about what advice would they give to other family members and loved ones of individuals who are currently incarcerated.
Absolutely. Caitlin's here, so she's willing to talk. The one thing I will say about the human element of it and the family element of it is that every time, so when the first parole hearing came up in 2008, I went and I was given 18 months, and it didn't make sense to my family. They thought I had did something wrong, I think. And so I had to start buying the recordings from the parole hearings just to prove that I had done everything that the parole commission had asked me. They had praised me during the hearings, but I was still denied release because of the arbitrary reasonings. So then after, 4 or 5 times of that, it takes a toll on anybody and all the family members. And then they start feeling like it's never going to end, and they start losing hope. So it's definitely difficult for the family as well as the person incarcerated, because they start to lose hope and they don't know when it's ever going to end. But I'll let Caitlin respond to your question as far as the emotional roller coaster and trying to deal with, everything from visitation to not knowing
Yeah.
the uncertainty of release and when is it's going to end. So I'll let her go ahead and answer that.
Hey, Sean.
Hey, Caitlin, how you doing?
Good. How about you?
I'm good. I'm good.
So I heard your question, and I've got a lot to say about it, of course. So I had never experienced anything like this before. I mean, outside in this world, people are expected to provide rationale for their decisions and for their actions. And after meeting Michael and going through this process with him, I realized that that the DOC and the former parole commissioners have had no supervision. I mean, their decisions are, they can make a decision without providing any rationale. I've come from the finance industry, and I kind of, when someone applies for a mortgage and they're denied that mortgage application, they're legally required by federal law to provide reasons for that denial. With parole, they can say, we just want you to do more time, just because. And it seemed, my perception of parole prior to knowing anything about the system isn't when someone's parole eligible, aren't we saying, okay, well, now they should be able to try to live in the community? Mm-hmm. Well, no, they aren't. They want these people to go through 10 years of being parole eligible. And it was just absolutely crazy to me when he was denied parole and got a 10-month deferment as a sort of as a consequence to he and I meeting at work. And the parole commission always maintains the philosophy that parole deferments are not to be used as punishment. Well, they absolutely are. And they don't provide, and no one's there held to any standard for that. Like, no one stops and says, okay, why is this person not going to fit into the community? What about them is not going to be successful? So that was the biggest thing for me that was shocking. I think that, what I think is the biggest thing for me is that if they're, for all people that are parole eligible, so if someone's met their parole eligibility date, they should be looked at like, okay, can they be out in the community? And is there a possibility that they could thrive? And if that possibility exists, then let's give them the opportunity, because let's be honest, they're still going to be on parole when they get out. They're still going to be monitored.
Yeah.
So why not give them that opportunity if they've met their parole eligibility date, you know? So,
and most family, and you would think, you know, and that's the rationale of, you know, family members. And so given that that is the rationale of family members and the general public, that if an individual has done everything they have been asked to do, and some, they should be given the opportunity to reintegrate back into the community, because the mission statement, if I remember correctly, of the Department of Corrections is to rehabilitate you. How they're doing that, I don't know. But that is the mission of the DOC. And if you have done everything, you completed every program, you've fulfilled all your educational obligations program, you would think that this individual should be released and returned to their families and their communities, but that is not happening. So my question to you real quickly before I read Mama's comment, Mike, Mom is on here. What is your advice, you know, to a spouse or significant other who have a loved one who is currently incarcerated and would love for their loved one to, you know, be released if they are, you know, eligible for parole, and are going through the same things that you all have gone through? What advice would you give them to keep the course, and what can they do to advocate for their loved ones out in the general public?
Get involved and shout from the rooftops. You know, that's the biggest thing. Like, you know, I was involved in Facebook groups and wisdom meetings. You know, anything that I would go to the parole board staff meetings, anything that involved the DOC or parole, I would be involved in. People need to know, you know, your story, and need to know your loved one's story. And I think that, you know, don't give up. Don't just sit back and idle and think, well, we're just going to wait till the next deferment. No, get the word out there. Stay involved.
Thank you.
There's one thing I would like.
Let me before you chime in, Mike. Let me read Mama's statement, man. Mama, you know, she on here.
All right.
No, you got to give space for Mama. Mary says, I'm Michael's mom. This whole process has been heart-wrenching. Michael has remained strong and determined to get his freedom. When I found out he was being released, it made me bawl like a baby because it was so long in coming. I'm sad that I can't be there to give him a great big hug, but at least we can talk via video chat, and it has been amazing. And I mean, I'm not a mother, but I'm a father, and I can only imagine. I can't even imagine. But I know how my grandmother and my mom felt when I was released as a result of me being sent to prison as a kid, as a baby. So I can only imagine how Mike, your mom, has felt. So I definitely, you know, man, I'm getting emotional, but I definitely understand that, and I'm glad that, you know, you have that support of your mom, your dad, Caitlin, and other family members and friends. So yeah, you know, so I encourage everyone that is viewing this, that is hearing this, to get involved, because the individuals who are currently incarcerated, they need our advocacy. They need our support, and they need to be returned to their family members, so that, you know, they can live free. Go ahead, Mike. I'm sorry. I know you want to say something.
I think one of the biggest things that family members deal with, or spouses deal with, is that there's a sense of powerlessness, and you can't get answers, and it can't make sense of what's not. It just doesn't make sense. It's not rational. So I think a lot of people struggle with that, and they don't know what to do. And they want to have faith in the system and have faith that things are going to go the way they should go. And that's not how it runs. So I think, like you guys are saying, as far as getting out, getting involved, seeing what's what, and doing as much as you can within your means is the only way you can fight and you know, make a point to make people answer to what they're doing, answer to you know, how they're throwing lives away for decades. It's not just years, it's not just days, it's decades that they're throwing people's lives away. One point that I wanted to touch on real quick was that I know a lot of people may think that Tony Evers and John Tate II is not doing enough, but they are doing a lot. I've never seen movement the way I saw right before I got released. And Caitlin had mentioned about conduct reports being used to raise deferments, and I do believe that it's been true traditionally. But Mr. Tate definitely made mention of the very few conduct reports that I had, and he realized and recognized that they're an anomaly within my day to day. So my 99% of the time I'm on point, but I've stumbled along the ways in 22 years. Um, but he made note of that and recognizes that that is not indicative of my character as a whole, but it's a part of humanity that we are all fallible. So I want to say that I definitely appreciate that from the chairman, and and that the people. I know it's not happening for everybody, and I think that there's some frustration there. And I can't tell them to be patient because they've been patient enough. So I just hope that the chairman continues to make the decisions to let people live, you know?
Okay. And I see that we have Representative Sortwell wanting to meet with the ACLU about drafting a bill documenting reasons for parole denial. He's offering that. And Representative Sortwell, thank you for joining us. Please tell your colleagues to join us as well every week. We're having this conversation about how we can reduce our prison population in a safe and sound way. We're thinking about, you know, how we can, you know, return individuals who have served sufficient amount of time back to their families and their communities. So we will definitely give you a call and have a conversation on how we can move a piece of legislation like that forward. Thank you for joining us tonight. And please continue to join us and tell your colleagues to join us as well. Michael, see, you have a state representative, you know, viewing this, and he's moved by some of the things you have said, and that is the reason why the ACLU Smart Justice Campaign does this work. This is why we are very intentional in ensuring that voices such as yourselves, my voice, and others who are impacted by the criminal legal system here in the state of Wisconsin are heard, you know, because it is our voices that can inform good policy, good legislation. It is the voices and the concerns of family members that can inform good legislation and good policy. So we have to continue to engage our elected officials. We have to continue to engage our governor. We know that he ran on the campaign to reduce the prison population by 50%. And I'm sure that that gave a lot of hope to individuals who were incarcerated. So basically, I want to have a conversation with you about, you know, what's the environment like? What's the climate like, given that we are in a global pandemic within the prison setting prior to you leaving and coming home? I know that you mentioned that you were on a pod with 47 other individuals, that the hallways were only 6 feet. Could you talk about whether or not the DOC is adhering to the CDC measures of social distancing, hand sanitizer, all of these things that the CDC recommends to prevent the spread of COVID-19? Could you talk about whether or not that was being adhered to? And we have a state representative watching, so maybe this is something that he can look into as well, because at the end of the day, we want to ensure accountability for our elected officials, as well as for these government agencies that supervise individuals within our carceral system?
Yeah, I think that a lot of it's smoke and mirrors when it comes to what's going on within the DOC and the prisons. Um, there are some steps being taken as far as some of the inmate janitors are having to clean twice as much as they did before. There's hand soap like normal, but there's nothing being done, in my opinion, that's going to be truly effective. While I was at Oak Hill recently, they had pretty much segregated each unit to itself. And you could no longer, they just opened up phase one of allowing people to go down to the gym per unit, not as a mixed units as they were. So I think that um, there's measures being taken, but they're not going to be effective, and they're definitely not up to the CDC standard. Um, and I think that that's due to the overcrowding. It's impossible to do it due to the overcrowding. Um, so I think that on paper it may look good as far as the steps being taken to protect people, but I know for a fact that it is not enough. Um, so yeah, they're not. It's the only thing that could happen. The best thing that could happen is prison reduction. And if
Mhm.
you have prison reduction, then you can isolate people enough. And just in the cells alone, there's 4-man rooms, and you're not going to be 6 feet apart. There's no way. There's 4-man, 3-man rooms, 2-man rooms, and it's not possible. The bathrooms, you're shoulder to shoulder. You're, in the chow line, you're shoulder to shoulder. So, um, without reduction in the prison population, you cannot protect people from COVID-19.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. One final question. About 15, 20 years ago, you and I, we met. We were in our late teens, 18, 19 years old, and we both like reading. We like lifting weights. Um, and we liked having conversations about what was wrong with the world, and not only what was wrong with the world, but what are the solutions. And so, given that we've unfortunately spent a significant amount of our life in a carceral setting, and have had the opportunity to analyze the ins and outs of this system. Um, Under knowing that we are living in a state with a prison population of over 23,000 people, well, 22,000 because COVID has afforded a couple of people to be released. Um, Given that we are a state that has over 68,000 individuals on probation, parole, or extended supervision, which essentially makes that population alone makes up the fourth or fifth biggest city in the state of Wisconsin. Given that we have over 2,000 to 3,000 people who have been in prison for over 20 years awaiting parole, given these problems that I just outlined, what are some of the things that we can do to begin to have a significant impact on reducing our prison population, getting these individuals who have served over 20 years in prison, and many of them, as you stated early on, were children. We were children, when we came into the system. What is it that the governor can do? You think? What is it that you think the Secretary of Department of Corrections can do? What is it that the general public can do to get some type of momentum around these issues?
Um, I think one of the main things is having people like yourself and Mr. Carl Fields and people that actually live the experience to help write the policy. We know that policy on paper is not always applied. It's impossible to apply at times, but on paper it looks good within the DOC. I think that having people that actually have been incarcerated and that they've educated themselves and they've come out and they're willing to use their experience to educate, I think that can go a long way as far as any type of policy being written, whether it's from the governor's office or state reps. Or I think that's one of the biggest things that I can think of offhand that can be impactful to helping people incarcerated.
Thank you, Michael. And I appreciate, your time. I appreciate Caitlin coming on and making her remarks. I thank your mom for the statement that she made. Thank you, Mary. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We do this every Wednesday at 6:30. Please join us every week, every Wednesday. We're going to be having these conversations about how we can improve our criminal legal system, and how we can restore the communities and the individuals who have been impacted by this system. We have a petition that we have out there where we're asking folks to sign a petition asking the governor to stop a prison pandemic. As we mentioned early on in the broadcast, that we are in a global pandemic in the prison setting. As many of you have just heard Michael say, that it is impossible to do social distancing. It is impossible to keep this environment where communicable diseases can spread easily sanitized. And so the ACLU of Wisconsin is asking individuals to sign our petition, to share this petition on your Facebook page, on your Twitter page, on your Instagram page, so that we can hold the governor accountable, so that we can hold the governor to his promise of reducing the prison population, of returning individuals back to their families and their communities. We need you to share this petition far and wide. We have 2 weeks left, and the petition would expire. We have a goal of 2,000 signatures that we're trying to collect. I think that we're halfway there, and I'm asking folks to please sign this petition. My colleague Molly Collins is going to share the petition on our Facebook comment thread, and we're also going to share the petition also on the chat in this Zoom call. And the individual who collects the most signatures and who comes in first or second place will receive an ACLU swag bag. Now, in that swag bag, you will have ACLU t-shirts, a tote bag, buttons, pins, etc. Whatever you can think of, 9 times out of 10, whatever you've seen myself or other ACLU staff wear, it's going to be in that bag. So please sign the petition, share the petition, and ask the governor to stop a prison pandemic. In addition to our petition that we're asking folks to sign and share to put pressure on the governor, we're also asking folks to utilize our sheriff toolkit. Most of the 72 sheriffs throughout the state are elected officials. They are elected officials. They are held accountable to you, the constituent. They are supposed to do what it is that you're asking them to do. And so we're asking folks to use our sheriff toolkit. And my colleague Molly Collins is also going to share the sheriff toolkit in the comments on the Facebook thread, as well as on the chat. And so the sheriff toolkit consists of a sample letter that folks can use and send to their sheriff, asking the sheriff to reduce the jail population. Pre-COVID, we had a jail population of over 12,000 individuals. I'm sure that number has reduced because the sheriff have been on board and doing some reduction, but they have not done enough. And so we're asking folks in all 72 counties to use our sheriff toolkit. Use the sample letter or draft your own letter. CC your county supervisor or your county executive and ask the sheriff to reduce the jail populations. We have graphics for for our social media posts that you can use and share on your Facebook page. If you don't know who your sheriff is, you can Google your county name plus the sheriff, and it will take you to a website with the contact info of who your sheriff is. And once you get that information, take our letter and modify it and put in there what you want to put in there and send it to your sheriff and CC your county supervisor and the county executive. And we're asking folks to do this as well because we want to have change on the state level as well as on the local level. When the sheriffs are on the local level, they control the jails and they are elected officials. So hold them accountable and use our sheriff toolkit, share it with your friends and family, and continue to follow the ACLU's efforts as we continue to move into this year, asking the governor as well as our elected officials to do the right thing, to restore individuals to their families and their communities, to take the burden off of taxpayers. We are a state that spends more on our prison system than we do our educational system. So we're asking you all to continue to join the ACLU's efforts in holding our elected officials accountable, and continue to follow us on all of our social media platforms. Continue to join us when we have these town halls. Join us tomorrow. My colleague Emilio De Torre, Community Engagement Director, he will be giving legal observer training tomorrow at 6 p.m. 6 p.m. Tune in tomorrow. That's going to be a great presentation. Right now, there's a lot of protest that is happening in the street. There's a lot of excessive force being used by law enforcement. And so the ACLU often provide legal observers to go out and to document and record law enforcement interaction with protesters and ensure that they're not doing anything that is violating the rights of these protesters. And if they do anything that violates their rights, we document this, we record this, and we follow up. So please tune in tomorrow at 6 p.m. And find out what a legal observer is, find out how you can be a legal observer yourself and contribute to these efforts. In addition to that, we have a COVID-19 resource guide for individuals who are returning to our community. You can go on our website, acluwisconsin.org, and click on resources, COVID-19 resource guide, and you can get all of the information as it relates to resources throughout the state. And you can email myself at swilson@acluwi.org, or you can email my colleague, Melissa Luden, at mluden@acluwisconsin.org. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you again, Michael, Caitlin, and your mom. And continue to join our efforts, folks. Continue to stay involved, stay engaged, and stay hopeful. We appreciate you, and join us tomorrow again at 6 p.m. for legal observing training being presented by my colleague, Emilio De Torre. Thank you.